Welcome, everyone, to a special new series that I'm thrilled to be hosting here on LinkedIn called The Entrepreneur's Chair. Throughout this series, my goal is to provide authentic and intimate conversations with trailblazing entrepreneurs that are reshaping the business scene in Austin. From startup founders to established business moguls, we'll dive deep into conversations about their challenges, their triumphs, and pivotal moments that shape their entrepreneur journey. I am thrilled today to introduce Dr. Priya Nalkur. She is a psychologist with a genuine and authentic approach. She earned her educational stripes from Yale and Harvard. She is the heart and soul of her company, Roundtable Institute, a pioneering force in the realm of inclusive leadership and professional coaching. Her book, which debuted in April, Stumbling Towards Inclusion, Finding Grace in Imperfect Leadership, offers an engaging narrative of her journey, beginning in the formative years where she felt as an outsider in small-town Canada, and evolving into a heartfelt mission to reshape leadership with a focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Welcome, Priya.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Wow, you make me sound so good.
It's very easy to do.
Thanks for that intro. I'm so honored to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Oh, well, I've been very excited to have you
Me
here.
too.
We just had your book launch, and it was so successful, so powerful, so congratulations.
Thank you. I'm still on a high from that.
So you have a successful CEO, now author, speaker, allowing you to have just a much bigger impact on the world. It feels like. What motivated you to write a book?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I've been thinking about that a lot over the past year, especially when you're in the middle of writing the book and you're like, what have I gotten myself into?
Sure.
But really it came from, I designed this program in response to a client need, and the program is called Jedi for Leaders. Mm-hmm. It helps leaders to be more equitable, diverse, and inclusive in their leadership journey and to really incorporate that into their leadership toolkit. And after doing this with so many leaders, these leaders were like, hey, we need the companion book to go with this program because you've taught us all this stuff, and 3 years later, I'm starting to forget things, and I want a reference guide. So I said, oh, that's easy. I just have to take the curriculum and package it into a book. Well, it wasn't so easy because then it turned out that the program and all those mechanics and behaviors that I was teaching these leaders came from my personal story. And the publishers were really interested in hearing my personal story. And so I had to really start to excavate my story, my upbringing, and my own journey of belonging and moving into a place of inclusive leadership so that I could share that I stumbled a lot along the way, and that's part of the leader's journey. Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to write not just a manual of these mechanics on how to do inclusive leadership, but a forgiving book that gives you permission to use your story to be the leader you mean to be. And so that's what I hope this book really is, the message of that book.
Being that vulnerable to kind of go back through all of our history, that takes a lot of courage. So thank you for doing it, because it just made the book that much more impactful to me, and I know from your readers as well. And you brought up Jedi leadership. And you use the acronym Jedi with adding the justice component with the DE and I. Can you talk a little bit about how that came about and the importance of that?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, it sounds great, right? Like Jedi, just people remember it. Yes. But beyond that, I think about equity, diversity, and inclusion as components of a larger universe, that universe being justice. And our workplaces do not work in isolation anymore. We live in a very interconnected world, a globalized world, where our workplaces are influenced by what's happening outside of our workplaces in society. And society is influenced by how we operate in our workplaces. So that reciprocity was really important for me to pay attention to. Workplaces need to be aware of what's happening in society, and the injustices that are happening in society in 2024 are emboldening people to speak up and ask for what they want in their workplaces. So we can't ignore what's happening in the social justice scene if we're going to be great leaders inside of our workplaces. And that's why it was really important for me to frame the work as justice first, and that equity, diversity, and inclusion happens within the context of justice.
That's really great. You talk in the book about inclusive leadership. I love that term, and that being a leader is about continually improving and learning. So one of the questions I had for you is how, when you're working with leadership teams, I'm sure you come into this situation where they're hesitant or in some cases even scared to have some of these challenging conversations or get it wrong.
Yeah.
How do you deal with that?
Yeah. Well, first of all, let me just say that leadership is hard. As you know, it's challenging, it's unpredictable. There's no playbook for being an effective leader. And because of that, and many of us end up in leadership positions without realizing how we got there or whether it even made logical sense for us to be there. So we haven't put a lot of investment into our leadership journey early on in our careers. So my invitation is, whether you're an individual contributor, an intern, I don't care what you're doing, you have to start to see yourself as a leader. You're someone who, whether you like it or not, you influence the people around you just by the way you talk to people, by the way you dress, the way you show up, the expression on your face influences people. So that's number one. But in my work with leaders, I realized that people are really afraid and scared because messing up has very high consequences, particularly in the world of inclusive leadership. Nobody wants to be accused of being racist or sexist or homophobic, etc. Nobody wants to be accused of being a bigot or discriminating. And yet we fall into inadvertent patterns where we might say something that inadvertently causes harm. And so I understand that the stakes are really high, but that doesn't mean we should stop trying to be inclusive. Now, I believe that great leadership is a lot of things. It's transformative, it's inspiring, it's motivating. It is also inclusive. And so if you want to be a great leader, you've got to pay attention to bringing people along and helping them feel valued, understood, and as though they feel like they are included into a bigger piece of the puzzle. So they're one piece of a larger puzzle. And the way to do that, I found, is one, I have to be vulnerable, to your point, to invite others to be vulnerable. Yeah. I have to be disarming. I have to, when I first meet someone, do something magical that puts their defenses down and says, okay, I'm willing to make mistakes. I'm willing to be imperfect. And the beautiful thing is when I tell people that if that's how you lead, you're giving other people permission to also be imperfect. And if we feel permission to be imperfect, we're going to take more risks. We're going to be more creative. We're going to ask harder questions. We're going to be more innovative. Now, who doesn't want a workforce full of people who are more creative, more thoughtful, asking harder questions and feeling valued for it? So, yes, it's scary. And I want to normalize that it's okay to be afraid because the stakes are high. But don't let that stop you from taking incremental steps towards the leader you know you're meant to be.
So we can make mistakes, but learn by them, ask questions, all those good things.
Well, I mean, even if you look at nature makes all kinds of mistakes all the time, and then they correct it. Nature has the ecosystem corrects itself, and we learn from those mistakes. So we have to make mistakes if we want a more perfect nature ecosystem. We don't get there by not making mistakes. Mistakes are part of it. Unfortunately, I think our school systems punish us for making mistakes early on. And we're not taught that it's okay and that perfection is not the goal. Being a good human is the goal, perhaps.
Right.
And that means that you're going to stumble a lot. Babies don't stop trying to walk when they fall. They get right back up because that's the instinct. We want to walk. We know that's important to us. If we want to be contributing members of society, we're going to have to get up and walk and learn to what happened? Why did I fall? What was in my way? Did I just stumble on myself or what happened? And learn from that and correct.
Well, and even the title of the book, right? Stumbling towards inclusion. I mean, that visualizes what we're doing about, right? Imperfect leadership, and it's okay, and grace. So I just commend you on the title of the book because it sets everything up.
Thank you. Yeah, grace is the antidote to stumbling and to imperfection. If you can give yourself the grace to say, I'm human. That's what I did. I fell over. I'm not the only one in the world who made a mistake. And give others that grace too, you're going to be more emboldened to take those chances. And when people see you doing that, they're going to feel included. They're going to feel seen. They're going to feel understood.
Well, your book was powerful on so many dimensions and even just lessons in great facilitation. I underlined a lot that I'm going to take into my practice, I have to admit. And one of the things that you talked a lot about was this concept of psychologically safe environments.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, when you're working with teams, how do you help them get to that place where they feel psychologically safe?
Yeah. So I'm so glad that you asked that question because safety is not something we can ever take for granted.
Right.
I really think I'm a mom. You know that. I have 2 kids. I think that my role as a mom is to keep them safe. That is my number one role.
Yeah.
And so it transcends, that logic transcends to workplaces. So let's first define what is psychological safety. So there's all kinds of safety. Obviously, we can't do work if we don't feel physically safe in our environments. We have to feel emotionally safe too. Can I express my feelings here, or will I be shamed for crying or for laughing or speaking loudly or for being enthusiastic in this workplace? And then psychological safety means, can I take risks with my voice? Can I ask questions? Can I say no? Can I ask for help? Can I make suggestions? Can I offer ideas that might be unpopular? Now, psychological safety doesn't mean that those acts are necessarily comfortable, but that you won't be punished and you won't be shamed for taking those risks. Now, it's theoretical and it's an ideal. Not all work environments are like that. In fact, few are. And even when you think you have safety, it can fall apart with just one comment.
Sure.
So how do I teach teams to build psychological safety? One, it's iterative. It's not just something that happens because you created a plan and hit your benchmarks and then boom, you're safe. It's iterative, it's developmental, it's emergent. It's really important that you have a mentality of we've got each other's back. And I know that the people around this table have my back. And it's amazing how we all have different definitions and conceptions of trust. And you, Elizabeth, could do one thing that erodes my trust.
Right.
And if you don't know what my definition of trust is, you wouldn't have known that you eroded my trust.
Right.
So we also have to speak openly, have conversations, talk about what just happened. Hey, Elizabeth, when you did that thing, here was the impact on me. It eroded my trust. Now I don't feel comfortable bringing that up. Or on the other hand, gosh, when you gave me that positive feedback after my presentation, I feel deeply connected to you, and that really built my trust in you, right? So being able to tell people the impact that they have on you and on the relationship is really what builds psychological safety. And the myth here is people sometimes think, well, I've got to give my team compliments. No, it actually turns out that when you give them constructive feedback, people feel like wow, you believe in me. You're investing in me. That feels really good.
Mm-hmm.
And now I can follow up with you on a new commitment or a new request. And we're learning together, and learning and growing is one of our basic human needs. And when we see that someone else is investing in our learning journey, then we start to feel safer around that table.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I see that with working with leadership teams that in the beginning, it just almost shutting down the discussion and the breakthrough that happens when at one point they start actually thanking the other person for disagreeing.
I know. Isn't that the best?
But if you've never experienced that, that's what it's all about, is getting them to that point, I believe. So thanks for sharing that. I think that's incredibly important.
One of the things is the reason my company is called Roundtable is because I want people to walk into the room and, people think they have to be all buttoned up. So I'm like, take your jacket off and leave it at the door. Also leave your egos at the door, because around this table, there are no power dynamics. And if there are, we're going to talk openly about them.
Uh-huh.
Leave your title at the door, leave your ego and your jacket at the door, and see people at the same level. And then we can build safety together.
Thank you. That's beautiful. So you talked a lot about in your book people that had come alongside of you, been a proponent for you. You also gave some really good examples, which I think, most people in their upbringing had these situations where they feel they're not belong. They just don't belong. They're an outsider. They're not listened to. How did you navigate these challenges when they came up in your life?
Yeah. So I think I want to put a finer point on what you just said, because the experience of being excluded is not limited to minoritized social identities.
Totally.
Right? We have all been alone. We have all been excluded. We have all been left out. I don't care what your social identity is.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Yeah.
And so because of that, we can relate and empathize. And that's part of the reason I shared my story.
Sure.
Because my stories, yes, have to do with being a brown girl among a lot of white kids. But a lot of my experience were just kids not knowing how to treat someone who was different from them. And we all see difference in each other. So the question again was?
Just the challenges when they popped up.
How did I deal with them?
Yeah, how did you?
I was a pretty obedient kid. I thought that I was who people told me I was.
Sure.
And you kind of are like, oh, you think I'm this way. Okay, I'm going to try that on. And sometimes it felt not quite right. And other times it did feel right. Some people understood me and other people misunderstood me, as we all go through life with. But it took me years to find my voice. Mm-hmm. To say, hey, wait a second, some people are getting me wrong. And this is actually who I am. Let me try it out with some people, with some places where I feel psychologically safe, and see what they say. And then okay, maybe I can take a risk and try it out in other places where I don't have as much safety, but I'm okay, trying out a risk and seeing what happens. So it's trial and error. I'm going to put myself out there in low stakes environments and build the stakes for myself. And then pretty soon, when you're 46 years old, you stop caring what people think to some degree. And you just sort of are like, this is who I am. And I think the other message I got, late in my 30s and early 40s, is you start to get these subtle reinforcements from people that when you stick your neck out for yourself, others get inspired. And they start to stick their neck out for themselves. And you're like, oh, I'm actually having an impact. I'm starting to spread. And other people are being moved by my example. And that's what leadership is. It's take away the ego. Just notice the impact you're having on people. And if it's positive, keep doing it. And if it's negative, change it. Right? It's not that hard. But we don't take the time to notice the impact that we're having on people.
Right.
And that's a really important part of leadership.
Now, I'm wondering, when in your career did you have the inspiration to start the Roundtable Institute?
So I'm going to share my story here a little bit. I never thought I was going to build my own company. But injustice does something to you. What it does for me is in some ways, it builds my rage. And I think that rage can be fueled in really productive ways. So late 2016, the United States of America was at an inflection point. We had a very polarizing U.S. election. And I woke up the day after the election, and I thought, I'm really worried and I'm really infuriated because I think that the voices of people of color, of the LGBTQIA plus community, and of women are going to be, and of disabled people and immigrants, etc., are going to be categorically minimized and dismissed in this new era. And I didn't want to take that sitting down because I belong to those communities. And I said, okay, the firm that I was working at also felt enraged by it, but wasn't doing anything active about it. So I said, okay, fine. If you're not going to do anything, I will. And I started the Roundtable Institute that day. And I thought, okay, I'm just going to start by focusing this work that I've been doing with all leaders. Now I'm going to focus on women and minorities. And then the companies were like, well, this is great, but now we want everybody in on it. I said, well, if you want everybody in on it, then I'm going to have to build a company. I'm going to have to build a team. And that's how we grew, because I didn't want to say no to good leaders who wanted to, their intentions were to build better, safer workplaces. So if I wanted to say yes, then I had to have a team behind me. And the very first thing I did in thinking about recruiting a team was I wanted a diverse team. I wanted people who were very different from me. I wanted excellent facilitators and coaches from whom I could learn a lot and broaden my own perspectives. And here we are. Now I've got a global team. We coach in multiple languages. We have people from different coaching schools, different backgrounds. We've got Grammy Award opera singers on our team. We've got professional athletes on our team. These are all people who are committed to the mission of inclusive leadership, and they come at it in such different ways that now we can say we're a tapestry of coaches, and we walk the talk of diversity and inclusion.
Well, it's funny because it feels like there's such a conversation. Oh, DEI is just about marginalized people.
Right.
And it's like, well, a majority person, it's going to benefit.
Yeah.
You're going to learn. And I don't care what your upbringing, you had some of these feelings as well. So why are we making it a us versus them instead of how do we just make everyone understand and treat everyone with respect and dignity?
Period. That's exactly right. Why did this become about race?
Yep.
I mean, it is about race, and it's about all these other facets of who we are.
Yes.
It's about humanity, and we don't need to categorize people to do good, inclusive leadership work.
Yeah. We want to be understood. We want to be seen, treated with respect.
That's right.
And this is a way we can get there. So yeah, I appreciate it. It's never easy, but it's excellent work. So the interesting thing I didn't know about you is some of your adventures. I did not know that you had climbed Mount Kilimanjaro or completed the W Trek in Patagonia. So you've got an adventurous spirit. How do you keep that kindled as you move forward?
I made a promise to myself years ago that every year I would challenge myself physically to something. So it's either been a summit at a big mountain or a marathon, or one year it was giving birth to my daughter. So, but that has given me so much fuel. And I find that my physical adventures are best done in nature. I get so much connection and by pushing myself physically in nature's natural challenges. And I think the thing that keeps me doing it is, yes, I am, obviously this like achievement oriented individual, right? I'm growing out of it. But the thing that keeps me doing it is, when you summit a mountain like Mount Kilimanjaro, you realize how insignificant you are and that the world does not revolve around you. And the mountain is a metaphor because you have to traverse all these different climates and you have to resolve in yourself that you can do it. And when you get to the top, you're like, oh, this wasn't about me. This was about the world and this is about nature and that we were in it together. I could not have done this without my team. I could not have done this without my gear. I could not have done this without the mountain cooperating with me in certain ways. So I love to be reminded that we as individuals are insignificant in this world. And yet I love the polarity because I also teach that you are significant and that you matter.
Sure.
And that you influence the people around you and recognize that that's a really reciprocal energy.
That's beautiful. Thank you. So I like to end each episode with 2 questions, which I ask at the same time. First, what authentically makes a successful entrepreneur? And secondly, how do you define success as an entrepreneur?
Oh, yeah. Well, I've got 2 different answers.
Okay.
And I think that if you asked me this question 3 years ago, I would have a different answer. And if you ask me 3 years from now, I'd have a different answer. And that just shows like how the journey of entrepreneurship is unpredictable and winding and emergent. But one thing I would say I've learned is, for me, it's been really important to remain detached to my outcome, but really deeply attached to my beliefs in myself, because that's all I can depend on. I can't depend on certain revenue outcomes or clients, but I can depend on myself and who I am and how I choose to show up in the world. And that's been my journey, right? Like if I think about how I've gotten to where I am, it's because I believed in myself. And I believed in other people, of course, to help me get there. But ultimately, I've had to make the decisions about whose advice to take, who to hire on my team, which programs are going to work, which I should leave on the cutting room floor, which programs I should put out into public and which ones are not ready. So that all starts with a belief in myself. The second question about, how do I define success?
Yes.
Well, right now in my life, if my kids are moved by what I do, I'm successful. If they want to talk about what I do, if they're curious, if it moves them to be better friends, to be better students, to be better, kinder to their teachers and to their friends and to each other, then I've been successful. For me, that's what it's all about. As a single mom, as an entrepreneur, I do this work, yes, for my leaders, but for my kids. I want them to have a role model. And I recognize whether I want to be or not, I am their role model, that they can do anything they want as long as they spread love and kindness and compassion to themselves and to others.
And I'll just say, I happen to be sitting next to your kid at the kids at the book signing and release, and they were so proud. So you're achieving the inspiration piece. I could definitely tell you. Congratulations on a significant and powerful book. I've read it, and I highly recommend that everyone pick up a copy. There's so many lessons and things that each of us can reflect on. And again, thank you for your time today. I've enjoyed it.
Thank you so much. I love you. You know that. And I love being here. Thank you for reading my book and for inviting me. This was a great conversation, great questions. Thank you.